Imagine waking up every few seconds into a world you don't remember making. Imagine the past as a foreign country and the future as a closed door. Tonight we tell two stories that bend time. Clive Wearing, the musician whose memory resets like a scratched record, and Kent Cochrane, who could remember facts but could not place himself inside them. Unable to imagine his future, these are clinical cases, but they are also philosophical mirrors. What do they reveal about memory, identity, and the strange architecture of the self? Clive Wearing was a celebrated musician and conductor. In 1985, a viral infection, herpes encephalitis, ravaged his brain. The result was catastrophic, severe anterograde amnesia and profound retrograde amnesia. He could not form new memories. His sense of the present snapped back to a narrow window of awareness. In interviews and documentaries, his memory has been described as lasting only 7 seconds, a phrase that has become almost mythic. But the truth is more nuanced. His awareness sometimes stretches longer, but the core fact remains. He lives in a perpetual present. He kept a diary, a small, stubborn ledger of the present. Page after page was filled with entries like 8:31 a.m. Now I am really completely awake. The first time, 9:06 a.m. Now I am perfectly, overwhelmingly awake. The first time, 9:34 a.m. Now I am superlatively actually awake. The first time, earlier entries were usually partially crossed out, especially the part of the first time that appeared at the end of every entry, since he forgot having made an entry within minutes and dismissed the writings. He did not know how the entries were made or by whom, although he did recognize his own handwriting. Wishing to record, quote unquote, waking up for the first time. He still wrote diary entries more than 20 years after he started them. Those crossed out timestamps read like tiny repeated acts of insistence, attempts to anchor a self that keeps slipping away. He forgot many things that happened before his illness. But one thing remains with startling clarity. He recognizes his wife, Deborah, with a flood of emotion each time she enters the room. In one interview, when asked what he missed or remembered about his old life, he replied, "The fact that I was a musician and in love." Those spare, specific words, factual and full of feeling, give a glimpse of continuity amid the rupture. The craft that shaped him and the love that moved him remain. Even when the narrative thread that binds moments into a life has been washed away, he can still play the piano with astonishing skill. Procedural memory, the memory of how to do things, survives. But the autobiographical thread that stitches moments into a life is gone. He cannot recall events that happened minutes ago. For Clive, the past is a set of islands, music, love, a few preserved skills. The bridge between them, the narrative self, has been washed away. What Wearing teaches us is the modularity of memory. The brain is not a single memory box. Episodic memory, the memory of events situated in time and place, depends on medial temporal lobe structures, including the hippocampus. When those structures are damaged, the ability to bind experience into a coherent timeline collapses, yet other systems, procedural memory, emotional memory, can remain intact. That's why Clive can still conduct a choir or feel love, even if he cannot remember the rehearsal that just ended. There is a cruelty to this condition that's hard to describe. Imagine the emotional intensity of greeting your partner as if for the first time over and over. But there is also a strange dignity. Clive's love is immediate, unmediated by memory. It's a love that exists only in the present, and in that way, it's almost pure. Now meet Kent Cochrane, sometimes known in the literature as Patient KC. He suffered a motorcycle accident in 1981 that left him with severe brain injury. Unlike Clive, Kent could answer some questions about his old life in a factual way, but he was unable to remember emotional details of events from his past. More importantly, he lacked autonoetic consciousness, the ability to mentally place himself in past experiences or to project himself into the future. He could not recall events vividly as his own, nor could he imagine future personal scenarios. He had semantic knowledge of his life, but no lived sense of it. This distinction between knowing and reliving is crucial. Kent could tell you that he had been to a birthday party, but he could not re-enter that party as a participant in his mind. He could not imagine himself growing old or plan a future in the first-person sense. He had lost automatic consciousness, the mental time travel that gives memory its subjective flavor. Neuroscience points to the hippocampus and surrounding medial temporal lobe as central to episodic memory. Damage there disrupts the binding of sensory details, context, and temporal order, the very ingredients of an episode. But memory is distributed. The prefrontal cortex helps with planning and imagining the future. The parietal lobes contribute to the sense of self in space. The limbic system colors memories with emotion. Different patterns of damage produce different syndromes. Clive is a catastrophic failure of episodic encoding. Kent is a failure of autonoetic awareness. Functional imaging studies show that remembering and imagining activate overlapping networks. When you remember a past event vividly, you recruit many of the same regions you use to imagine a future event. That's why some researchers call memory mental time travel. If a network that supports this travel is damaged, you lose both backward and forward projection. You can have semantic knowledge, facts about your life, but no first-person experience. So memory is not just storage, it's simulation. The brain uses past episodes to model possible futures. When that simulation engine breaks, planning and personal continuity suffer. That's not just a clinical curiosity, it's central to how we make decisions, form commitments, and imagine ourselves in tomorrow's shoes. Now, let's get philosophical. If memory stitches the self together, what happens when the stitches come undone? Are Clive and Kent the same persons they were before their injuries? Or are they new beings who happen to occupy the same body? Philosophers have long debated personal identity. Locke famously tied identity to memory. You are the same person as long as you can remember being that person. But cases like Clive and Kent complicate Locke's view. Clive has emotional continuity and procedural skills. Kent retains semantic facts. Neither fits neatly into a memory-based identity theory. Some philosophers argue for a psychological continuity view that includes more than episodic memory, beliefs, desires, character traits. Others emphasize bodily continuity or narrative identity, the stories we tell about ourselves. But when narrative capacity is impaired, narrative identity phrase, Theresa moral dimension 2. How should we treat someone whose future-oriented self is gone? We still owe them care, respect, and dignity. But our social practices promises long-term contracts. Parenting assume a future self who will remember and be motivated by present commitments. When that assumption fails, our ethical frameworks strain. What do these cases tell us about everyday memory? First, they remind us that memory is not a single faculty but a constellation of processes. Second, they show that the subjective sense of self, the feeling that I persist through time, depends on specific neural mechanisms. Third, they force us to confront the ethical and social consequences of memory loss, caregiving, autonomy, and the meaning of responsibility. There's also hope. Understanding the neural basis of memory opens paths for rehabilitation. Techniques that scaffold memory, external aids, structured routines, environmental cues can improve quality of life, and research into memory reconsolidation and neuroplasticity suggest that the brain can sometimes rewire itself, at least partially. But There's a lesson here too. Our ordinary sense of being a continuous self is fragile. It depends on biological systems that can fail. That fragility can be terrifying, but it can also be liberating. If the self is partly constructed, then perhaps we have more freedom to reshape it than we thought. Clive Wearing lives in a present that renews itself every few seconds. Kent Cochrane lived with a past that was known but not owned, and a future he could not inhabit. Both cases strip memory down to its bones and show us what remains when the scaffolding is gone: emotion, skill, facts, and sometimes a stubborn, immediate love. These stories force us to ask what matters in a life. Is it continuity of memory, the capacity to plan, the presence of relationships, or something else? There may be no single answer, but by listening to limes like Clive's and Kent's, we learn to hold complexity and compassion together. If you're thinking about your own memory tonight, try this. Close your eyes and imagine yourself 5 years from now. Notice how easy or hard it is. Notice whether you imagine yourself as a continuous thread or as a series of moments. That simple exercise is a reminder that memory is not just about the past. It's the engine that drives our future